Okay, maybe we can start now to be mindful of the time. So I started recording as well. All right, so welcome everybody to today's live event titled Life Beyond Refuge, Stories of Impact. This is hosted by the Center for Community-Based Research located in Waterloo, Ontario, and we're so glad that you decided to join us today. First, let me introduce myself. I'm Sherry Rezvani, and I'm a researcher at the Center for Community-Based Research, and I will be the moderator for today's session. Just to let you know that this live event is an hour long. And for the first half, our presenters will speak about the power of stories in community-based evaluation and research, and they will also share stories from the field. So feel free to use the chat box to ask your questions and connect with other participants during the presentation. You can find the chat box on the bottom bar on your screen. Make sure you send your questions and answers to all the panelists and attendees so everyone else can also see them. We will be answering your questions on the second half of the session. There are two ways to communicate with us. You can use the chat box or you can use the raise hand feature on your screen. So if you click on that button, I will get a notification, then I can unmute you so you can speak out and ask your question or share your stories with us. I also want to let you know that this session will be recorded and made available on our website. So later on, you can access it and check it out. I'm pleased to introduce today's presenters, Rich, Joanna, Louisa, Shelley, and Mason. I pass it over to you, Rich.
Thanks, Sherry, and welcome everyone. As Sherry mentioned, Joanna and I, we work for the Center for Community-Based Research, which is a nonprofit organization located on the University of Waterloo campus. If you want to show the next slide, Sherry. And together with the University of Alberta, we're leading a national project called Evaluating Refugee Programs. Next slide. It's a national project which is looking at building the evaluation capacity of groups who support refugee newcomers, supporting them to do community-based evaluation. You can see the screenshot of our website there, and on the next slide, you can see the different resources that we have available on that website. And so if you want to do community-based evaluation and you don't know how, or you wanted to hone your skills on that, there's lots of different types of resources that can help you to do that.
Hi, this is Joanna Ochoca, and I also welcome each and all of you today. And thank you very much for showing up. We are very excited about this webinar today. This is our agenda. We'll start with framing the stories. Framing stories, the importance of stories in qualitative research, but also in community-based evaluation. After that, we will talk briefly about life beyond refuge theory of change, which is a framework describing outcomes for refugee newcomers. And this frame will help us to move to the major part of our webinar today, which are the illustrations from the field. We are very excited to have three amazing presenters representing three different organizations in Winnipeg, Kitchener, Waterloo, Ottawa, who will be talking from the field about the experience of using stories. We'll end up this webinar with open discussion, and we invite all of you to actively listen and ask questions. Let's begin.
So let's start with the power of stories. We know that in qualitative research, there's a rich history of using narrative approach to capture the lived stories of people. You know, stories are more than just describing the chronology of events, what is happening. They also try to make a point, and they try to create meaning out of that, building an argument for why something is important. And I think storytelling is growing in popularity partly because they're simple, and yet they're also profound. What's more basic or understandable or even enjoyable than a good story? They're also powerful forms of communication. They try to illuminate and they give insight into things that are interesting both to the listener and teller alike. And it's important to note that today, as we're talking about stories, that they can be about individual people. We can have personal stories, or stories can be about groups or communities or society as a whole. So we can have individual or collective stories. And this is a point that our guest presenters will be coming back to later on in the webinar.
Stories are also very powerful when we think about community-based evaluation. Community-based evaluation can leverage the power of story. And at CCBR, we often use storytelling or case studies that are part of the evaluation. And really, they very much emphasize the point that the evaluation or results of the evaluation that they are making, especially in community-based evaluation, which is really focusing on stakeholders-driven, participatory, and action orientation, which are the major principles which are privileging newcomers in having voice, which are really emphasizing collaborative construct of the meaning and message being constructed by evaluation, but also provide opportunities for growth and change. This is the action orientation. So stories have a lot of benefits, and they have a lot of give us a lot of opportunities to help us to imagine the future that we want to see, but also the possibilities, and bring some evidence and voice of people who are central to evaluations. So stories in community-based research are used very often to demonstrate outcomes. And stories connect both experience of people going through their life experiences, but also the change and impact that they experience. Story makes outcomes much more tangible and very much making them stronger and much more relatable. Stories can help assess if desired outcomes have been reached, and stories also identify unexpected outcomes. So there is a lot of power in using stories in community-based evaluation to demonstrate the change and possibilities of future programming or future lives. So we would like to invite you to think about using stories in your community-based evaluations.
And before we turn it over to the presenters, we wanted to just share this framework that inspired the title of this live event, Life Beyond Refuge. We developed this framework after looking at the literature about how people talk about outcomes related to refugee newcomers. And we called it a systems theory of change because it shows the outcomes across the refugee system of support. And really, if you think about it, this is like a menu of options, that if you're supporting refugee newcomers and you want to build your own theory of change, your own identifier, the activities that you do and the resulting outcomes or impacts, you can look to this framework for help. The diagram's fleshed out more in the outcome inventory. You can see the link at the bottom of the page where all of the outcomes on this framework are linked to indicators, which are also linked to the broader literature. So let me just walk you really quickly through it. On the left, you have activities that support refugee claimants. The words in black are the outcomes of supporting that are associated with supporting people through the claim process. The dashed line that you see tells us that not all refugees come as claimants. Most don't. But for those that do, there's something unique about their journey. And in the middle, you can see some of the migration experiences that are common to the resettlement experience. There's something unique about refugees and their migration experience, different from other newcomers, outcomes such as safety and agency and resilience. But then there's also something that's common across all newcomers. And so you can see the settlement and adaptation outcomes there. And then finally, way over on the right, you can see the outcomes that refugee newcomers share with all residents of Canada. We all want to feel integrated and have a sense of belonging within society, and we all want to be well. So those are the outcomes at the individual level, but many of you and others work also at the community level, where we want to make changes both in terms of welcoming community attitudes and welcoming community practices. And we do this in order to create the conditions for newcomers to resettle, to settle, adapt, and to integrate. And then finally, right at the bottom is the work that's done at the macro level, at the level of society that reinforces and stimulates the other levels of change. So that's a really quick overview of this diagram. And as the presenters talk about stories of impact, those impacts can be situated on this systems theory of change.
So we have 3 presentations to follow, and each of the presenters will be speaking to 2 main topics. One, it will be the usefulness of telling stories to make change. They will be reflecting what's the power of stories getting results or outcomes in the level of change that we are striving for. So it could be this individual level, organizational level, or maybe systems level. They will also talk about usefulness of stories to in evaluation to make change based on evidence that stories are providing. So how can stories be used in evaluation in helping to make evidence-based decision to make the improvements at any level, again, that we are working in. So we are excited to move to the major part of the presentation and hear from our 3 amazing speakers. Over to you, Shelley first.
Good afternoon. My name is Shelley Campanola. I'm the Executive Director of Mennonite Coalition for Refugee Support. We often call it MCRS because it's a little easier to say. We are involved in, we work with people who are seeking refugee status. They are refugee claimants. Asylum seekers is another term that would be familiar to a lot of people. And so we start in that circle that's to the left, supporting the claim process, and we journey with people until they're all the way to the right and they are integrated and well in our community. And the question, in terms of story is, what's the role of story in our work? How do we know that it's really important? Actually begins over on that left-hand side in a sector that is can be very polarizing and have a lot of different understandings of what it means to be seeking asylum, what it means to be coming across the border. Certain perceptions can really land in people's thinking and mind. And to give you an example of what this can look like, at a very individual level, I was sitting at a dinner with something totally unrelated to our work, but sat beside a couple that had somehow we got talking about asylum seekers and refugee claimants and some very strong and negative thoughts towards that group of people that definitely need Canada's protection. And I pulled out a picture of a couple that I had of when I stood in the Toronto airport watching a family be reunited after a lengthy journey through this entire process, from the left-hand side supporting the claim process to the right-hand side, being integrated and well in our community. And I shared the story of, having this father having been separated from his family for 2 years, had never seen his daughter who had been born while he was here awaiting to receive Canada's protection. and the reunion that they experienced at Toronto Airport. And the picture was them of just embracing. And that was a very powerful, powerful connection to the humanity of the process, as opposed to just the system of the process. To see that this is real people who have had to leave behind those that they love, and what it means for them to see them again for the first time in 2 years. And it completely changed this couple's perspective on the journey. And so, you know, we talk about stories as bringing around impact for change. A powerful story that demonstrates in picture form and in word form what the journey is all about was very powerful for this couple. And then when you think about, well, okay, so what does that mean in the larger piece? You know, how are we connecting? What was it about it that brought about that impact? It was connecting the story of the refugee claimant with the story of this couple who knew exactly what it would feel like to be separated from people, from the people they love for any length of time. And story is so important in that way that it connects people's journeys together. It's not just a story of somebody over there somewhere, it's our story. And when we can use story to show that the human journey is one of being connected, of one being integrated, of being well in our communities, that has a way of bringing about change in ways that you really can't in any other way. At an evaluation level, how do we know that we are successful? I could tell you, and this is true, that we work with over 1,600 people, and I can tell you that up to 90% of them will get Canada's protection at some point in their journey. And you can sit there and think, wow, like just be overtaken by those numbers. But does that actually tell us that we're successful? Just because we have all these numbers and that, you know, we've grown in the last 4 years, but how do we know that we're good at what we do? Is it just the numbers, that quantitative data? Or is it the stories, the qualitative evaluation that says what we're doing is not only, you know, we're not only growing and we're not only seeing a lot of numbers come through, but people's lives are being changed in very positive ways. How are people who have come through us talking about us? What are the stories that they are sharing? Because that tells us whether what we're doing is successful or not. And it's been great to connect with people who have been helped by us to talk about afterwards their journey, and to have them share the impact that has had on them individually, as a family, and then even next generation. We even have people on staff who were helped, their families were helped by us, you know, 20 years ago. And they are still celebrating the difference that it made to have an organization like ours come alongside them and care about them, not just help them through a process, but help them in their resettlement, help them in their adaptation, fostered welcoming community by being a welcoming organization ourselves, and allowing that to spread out beyond us. That's what leads to integration and wellness. And when we get those stories that it's working, we know that we're doing something right. And so it's really important to us that we get that story and those a collection of stories, not just one, because you know you can do it really well with 1 or 2 people, but if you can do it well consistently with most of the people that you are working with, you know you have a formula for success in what you are doing. For the donor, because we're a charitable organization, they too need to know that what we're doing works, that it does change lives. And again, we can give them all kinds of numbers, but when they see it in the story, it connects them to their own success. And they can say, hey, I can be a part of that because that's telling my story too. So let me give you an example. We are going to be celebrating the story of Waterloo Region as being a refugee welcoming community by going all the way back to, you know, 1924, when the first refugees, Russian Mennonites, got off a train and walked to a local church. and began to be settled in this area. It was the first time refugees actually stayed in this area. And here we are, 97 years later, we continue to have successive waves of people coming as refugees to this community. It's a part of the story of the Waterloo region. And in 3 years, we're going to be celebrating that in a big celebration, inviting many others to join in that. That is the story of our community. It's not just, an individual story. It's not just an organizational story, but it's a story of how a community has been shaped in a very positive way by successive waves of refugees successfully integrating into our community. And it becomes a model for other communities. I've talked with, other communities in Halifax and in Fort Erie and in other places, and you could talk Vancouver and Montreal, and the success that has happened with people coming that fundamentally changes people's views of refugees coming, because clearly something's working if we're still doing it 100 years later, and the communities are stronger for it. So the power of story to change a person's life, to impact a perspective of that journey, to impact how a community views itself, how an organization does its work, is fundamental to communicating success and investment in that story, to continue that story going, that it's worth doing. And so that would be how we would explain it from MCRS's perspective.
Thank you, Shelley. This is very powerful, powerful presentation to make the point about the power of stories. Thank you very much. We'll move to the second presentation right now. Maysoon?
Hello, everyone. Yes, thank you, Joanna. Hello, everyone. My name is Maysoon Darwish. I am the program coordinator for migration and resettlement at MCC Manitoba. First, I want to thank Shelley for this really powerful presentation. I really enjoyed it, and it was very actually informative. Thanks a lot. At Migration and Resettlement at MCC Manitoba, we really give lots of attention to stories. Yes, we do lots of follow-ups with CGs, with refugees, under what we call it a needs assessment, but we rely a lot on stories. Why? Because refugees have story from had two paths, before the arrivals and after the arrivals. As we are working with private sponsored refugees and blended visa office referral refugees, we always have a background about refugee stories, the journey of their refuge, how they left their country, how they reached the host country, how they suffer, like the whole storyline until they arrive to Canada. Mainly, we try to understand the obstacles and the difficulties that they faced until they come here. But also we follow up with them to understand the continuous of their stories after their arrivals. I used to share my personal story as a former refugee, and I use it to get more attention and awareness about refugee situation. Same things are happening with refugees that are sponsored now and previously through Mennonite Central Committee. One story I would like to share actually is related to a family who arrived to Winnipeg 4 years ago. It was really sad when they came to us last year asking to bring their daughter, who wasn't declared in the documents when they came to Canada. Because after they get the visa approval, the mom gave birth, and she was really afraid to inform the embassy about her baby. So she left her baby behind, and she came to Canada with her husband and children, leaving that little girl with her uncle. Someone in the refugee camp had informed them, and be aware here that this is really common story. You will hear it a lot about undeclared children or undeclared family members. So somebody in a refugee camp actually informed them that just go to Canada. When you arrive there, you can bring the daughter. That wasn't the case, because in the government eye, this girl is not exist, their daughter is not exist, and they weren't able to bring her under family class or even through 1 year window. So the family had to form a group of 6 people, raise the money to bring the whole, uncle's family, the uncle, the wife, 6 children, just to see their own daughter. This put a heavy burden upon their shoulder, but they were willing to do anything to just see their daughter, who's now 4 years old, and they never see her. Hearing this story and with other stories that have similar background, all happen because of, lack of knowledge regarding the laws and structures here, just put us in a front line with the CGs to inform them about the importance of informing us no matter what happened. You get married, please let us know. You have children, please let us know. We will take care of these things on our side. Now, I would like to address the importance of combining storytelling and needs assessment that we are conducting regularly with our refugees and CGs. In many cases, we observe the challenges, the difficulties, the obstacles that refugees are facing here in their integration journey in Canada. These obstacles are very similar in many cases, such as language barrier, employment, mental illness, community connection. Talking about these observations, we were able to do a proper referral to these refugees based on storytelling specifically. We were able to do a proper referral to resettlement agencies here that played a very important role in order to ease the integration transition. Lots of refugees, we figured that they have massive trauma actually, and they need to get counseling from certain organizations here in Winnipeg. That was very helpful, plus the community connection that they have. Also, we were able to understand the uniqueness in each story, and it helped us to deal with each case differently and individually. I have lots of examples. I can take the whole day talking about each example, so I will try to be very specific here. The observation gave us lots of conclusions in order to improve our program, to avoid what might really prevent refugees to integrate or slow down their integration. And it also showed us the better way to create new programs. For example, this is another example, bear with me, please. For example, we observe the successful integration among refugees who were sponsored through churches compared to refugees who were sponsored through their own communities. Of course, they were able to, secure jobs. They were able to, have better level in English, but yet they didn't have community connection with local society. Refugees who come through churches, they already have this local communication. So they were able to understand the culture here, the society, how things are going. While refugees who came through their own communities, they stuck within their own bubble. So because of that, we decided to start a new initiative within Migration and Resettlement in MCC Manitoba, and we will start this initiative. And by the way, I'm sharing this with you for first time. We will start this initiative in January by introducing certain churches to refugees who were sponsored through their own communities. Some churches want really to help refugees and they are really eager to do something very powerful, but yet they lack the financial capacities. So in this case, we are going to build the bridge between these churches that represent the local society and refugees who lack this connection with local societies. So this cultural interacting will help both sides to understand the cultural background, the life, the refugee situation, and it will raise awareness about refugees cases all over the world. We always share these stories also with our CGs. CGs means constituent groups, if someone just wanted to ask what that means. So sharing these stories will bring everything, to life. Like, to watch the news is different than hearing the stories from people who went through these difficulties and live this refugee journey. So the impact always become very influential, because we always hear the positive feedback that, oh, we didn't hear such a thing. We didn't know this is the reality. Again, another example regarding Syrian refugee influx. When people hear the stories from Syrian refugees in person is different than watching the news. Yazidis, for example, Yazidi woman tragedy, what happened after ISIS attacked their villages. Hearing the stories from Yazidi women had really brought lots of support and lots of power to the local society to understand what's happening, and also to evaluate based on our knowledge what really matter and what they need, the challenges, the obstacles, and how we can overcome all these difficulties. Of course, we don't have a magical sword to solve everything, but at least we always try to create programs, try to make things happen in a very smooth way. So this will ensure the adjustment, integration, good connection between refugees and local community. I'm not going to talk too much. I have lots of examples, as I mentioned. I will stop here and leave it to Louisa. I do believe she's also waiting to speak about these issues. Rick, you gave us 10 minutes. Hopefully I didn't exceed the 10 minutes. Thank you so much.
Well done, and thank you very much for all your illustrations, Maysoon. Over to you, Louisa.
Thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me to be here today. And in particular, thank you to Shelley and Maysoon. Your words are so inspiring, and I'm honored to be on a panel with you. So I think that some of you may not know Refugee 613. First thing I always need to explain is our name. I often forget. Most people in Ontario and Canada will know, but that the area code for Ottawa is 613. And so when we started, we were very locally focused, communications and mobilization hub. We've since started doing work across Canada, but our feet are firmly grounded here in Ottawa, where we do a lot of research and convening and mobilizing. So what we do, our vision is that everyone thrives in a welcoming world. And we work toward that. And the everyone is key, because it's newcomers and the communities that welcome them. So you can see that where we fit on the theory of change that CCBR has shared with us. So we work toward that vision by improving refugee welcome and integration through communications and information support for both refugees and those who welcome them. And increasingly, what we're very aware of is that a lot of those activities, tools, tactics work for many newcomers, not just refugees. That's just where our particular focus is. So we provide convening, information support, content creation, and strategic advice to anybody who wants it, who is working with, supporting, or volunteering with newcomers. So that often means service providers, private sponsors, leaders of diaspora communities, and then on into other sectors across the community. So fundamentally, we believe that a more informed, community does a better job of welcoming and integrating newcomers, and helps us all thrive. So as I mentioned, we fit into that welcoming communities, practices, and attitudes aspect of CCBR's theory of change the most, but our work actually cuts, because it's communications, it cuts across just about every area. So stories are a big part of what we do. We produce storytelling events. We help others figure out how to tell their stories. We do research to better understand what the stories are in our communities and how best to tell them and how to better understand our audiences. And we do training, and we also do media work and social media campaigns. So for the purposes of today's discussion, I sort of see three key aspects of where our work where we feel storytelling intersects with evaluation, and you know, in preparing for this, in our preparatory discussions, we all had it was a bit of a struggle because there's sort of there's a lot of overlap and sort of shifting sands where you know, storytelling, evaluation is storytelling in its way, and storytelling also helps us to understand our world and to provide synthesis and analysis. So forgive me if some of this feels like it's overlapping a bit, and I will echo some of the points that that the previous panelists raised. But fundamentally, I think that the first thing for us is that engagement is number one, and engagement with your target audience. So the target audience is everything in storytelling. Who are they? Who are you speaking to? And who are you? And that's not necessarily who you're speaking about, but in our case, often it is. And we know that the target audience should be number one in service provision, just as in storytelling, but it isn't always the case. And we've all experienced that, where the people that programs should be designed in consultation, close consultation with the intended participants. But sometimes we don't actually pause and ask those questions of the audience. And it's the same in storytelling. So making sure that we, and that's a maxim, sorry, of communications in general. Your audience is number one. Who are you communicating to? And what do they need to hear from you in order for your communications to have desired impact? So in this case, often the work we're doing is communicating to newcomers themselves. So it's so important to be talking to newcomers themselves and not just the intermediaries. We know that many newcomers are service providers, many newcomers are private sponsors. They hold a piece of the puzzle, they are subject experts, but it's most important to put the newcomer voice at the center of that evaluation process, but also of the story creation and collection. And so to do that, you need to actually ask them direct questions. It's the best way to get the best stories. So for us, our methods are primarily, well, there's obviously one-on-one conversations in the course of working with people to keep our ears to the ground, but then we get more formal and we have surveys where, yep, we're collecting numbers for sure, but we're also asking a lot of anecdotal, open-ended questions to yield anecdotes that always enrich the data. And often we think we've written the best survey in the world. And then we always make sure we have a couple of open-ended questions where people say, there was nowhere, what they give us is, there was nowhere in this survey to say X, and it really, really matters to me. And we think, okay, this is why we have open-ended questions, because often we don't know what we don't know. We're also big fans of focus groups to uncover truths that no survey has identified and often go beyond what community leaders or service providers can ascertain. So I'll give you a very recent example. We have been working with Ottawa Public Health on some of their messaging to newcomers. As we all know, the newcomer and racialized communities across Canada have been very hard hit by COVID, both in terms of job losses and infection rates. And we have seen a massive gap in understanding that audience in terms of public health information. How that information is being generated, what language, what format, what the messaging is. And so we're really happy to say that after, you know, by this fall, we are having regular meetings with public health and trying to inform their communication strategies. And so recently they particularly wanted to improve testing rates in neighborhoods with high infection rates. So their communications team and their community outreach team was very well connected to subject experts like community leaders, health workers, service providers. But as wouldn't be surprising, they weren't that well connected to the target audience, the newcomers themselves. So we said you need to evaluate what your intended audience knows, what they don't know, where they get their information. Don't just, you need the input of the subject experts, but you need the input of your target audience themselves. So they embraced this idea, and we suggested focus groups, and so with Ottawa Public Health and the Southeast Ottawa Community Health Centre arranged a focus group. It was just happened last week, and we facilitated. We helped to write some of the questions. And what came out of that were validation or confirmation of things that had been flagged by some of the subject experts. For example, people aren't getting tested because they fear the stigma. They fear losing their jobs because of the need to self-isolate after getting tested and not having leave from work. But the focus groups also revealed things that no one involved was aware of. For example, the communities did not have adequate, the residents did not have adequate awareness of where their local testing centers were. Or if they did, it was kind of by accident. So one person said, I discovered where the testing center was because I went by it and there was a big lineup outside. So that pointed to, a need for better communication about that. And it pointed to the need for better signage, literally the signage on the building. There was the fear of language barriers, of thinking that they would not be able to understand the people giving them the test. And then there was a discussion about pain level, the pain of the test, and whether it was, how painful it was, and also the fact that of the group members of the members of the focus group, there were seven people who were from that neighborhood, but from very different communities within the neighborhood, but they all said the same thing. If they had heard about a testing center, they had also heard which testing center the test was more painful at which testing center. And the word on the street was very clear that this certain place was less painful than another. And it was known. And so that gave Ottawa Public Health some very important information to take back. To be fair to public health, they don't run the testing centers. It's run by the hospitals, but it's important information for the hospitals. So that focus group was a form of evaluation, but it was the stories that were coming out that are going to be so rich and powerful for the people who organize them and who need that information. And secondly, just hearing from individuals directly themselves and understanding on a very personal level in a way that the numbers that we know about infection rates and neighborhoods and the impact on newcomers was brought to life so much more for key decision makers because they could sit and listen to the stories coming directly from the audience themselves, unfiltered. And finally, I would say that the other thing that we've learned is the importance of sharing what we're learning back with participants. So we will be doing a summary of the learning from the focus group and sharing it, partly for validation, but also for transparency and accountability to demonstrate, here's what we heard from you, here's the meaning we took away from it, and do you have any comments, feedback, anything to add? And that enables us to be able to evolve, adapt, and improve. So I think I'm going to stop there. I think my fundamental point is that, as I think what all of us are saying, that numbers are vital, but they're not everything. And when you hear from people directly how it affects them, you're going to have not just richer data, but bigger impact with the audiences for your data. Whether it's you, your colleagues, policymakers, and service providers. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Fantastic job, Luisa. Thank you very much. A lot of thoughts for us to think and react to. So Sherry, over to you to lead us into the open discussion.
Yeah, for sure. I want to thank Luisa, Mason, and Shelly as well for sharing your stories, and also I can understand how powerful they can be in order to impact that change. And yeah, I hope everyone else also enjoyed this amazing presentation. So now we are on the discussion part. So feel free to share your questions with us on the chat box, and do not forget that if you would like to speak out, you can use the raise hand feature. I can unmute you, and then you can share your stories with us or ask your question. And I can get to one of the comments that we received in the chat box. And Kate recommended a book, and it's called Abu Bakr al-Rabi's story, if I'm not pronouncing it wrong. And that's again a refugee story that really relates to whatever we have been talking today. So thanks, Kate, for sharing that resource with us. And yeah, feel free to share your questions here. We are waiting for you, and we have our great presenters to elaborate more on this topic.
So we have one question already in there. It's a really good question. It's a question related to stories and funders. We know that funders often ask for outputs, counting things that you do as service providers. You need to provide that. But the question is, how do you walk alongside funders to incorporate stories into Westernized reporting practices? So I'm wondering if any of you three presenters want to share any of your stories of how you interact with funders on a storytelling basis.
I may answer this based on our situation. Our funders mainly are our CGs. So reporting, usually it happens based on the cases to our director, but regarding funding, we share the stories with the CGs, and all the time we bring people actually to talk about their own experiences. As I mentioned, I always share my story. I always share my personal refuge, journey. And many times I said, when people hear it, let's say church groups hear the stories from, former refugees, they want to ask, they want to know, they want to interact. So it doesn't apply, let's say, to government fund, because for us it's a bit different. So I answered based on our own experience within migration and resettlement in MCC Manitoba. I will leave it to the other representatives, so they might be able to answer based on the government fund.
If I can't figure out how to raise my hand. I don't see it on as an option, but so I'll just jump in. I think that's a great question. And I don't know, because I haven't spent enough time trying to make the change at a systemic level. But I know that every funder report that we do, whether they give us the option and whether they invite us to tell stories or not, we do it. So sometimes that means we force stories into boxes where they're asking about something else, or sometimes when it's not on a portal and it's, we're emailing a report, our email will include, to send them the report, we will include, here are the stories we think are important. So I know that's not making the really systemic change that you're looking for, but for us, it's a way of sort of saying, we're not going to let you just focus on the numbers. Here are the stories that you need to hear as well. So it's just kind of a little rebellion on our part.
Shelley, anything from you?
Yeah, I like that. I like to ruffle the feathers a little bit, right? But I think, I would just want to kind of go back to what my comments were earlier, and that's joining the story of the funder with the story of the person that and the people you're trying to help. And, it doesn't actually take a whole lot to do that. I know, again, you look at quantitative data and return on investment and, all of those kind of financial data kind of things, right? But even telling the story of, and we did this recently in a major funder report that we had to do. So here I'm going to tell a story of how we addressed this very issue. And we said, listen, we are people and we need space. And that's where, most of the money goes, is to the people and to the space, right? But on a per person basis, it is, if you want to get down to the numbers, it's cheaper to help a refugee claimant through MCRS than it is to have your children in piano lessons. And, or, whatever other activity that they might be doing. It works out to less a month to change a life than it is to give your child a lesson in, piano, hockey, baseball, whatever. And so finding ways to bridge, to build the story, and to say, like, to join the stories together. What is the funder actually wanting to do? They don't want just projects, even though it's kind of project based. And a reason they tend to do that is because it's measurable, it's short term. You can see some results through the money. But what are they actually really trying to do? They want to know that they have impact, that lives have been changed, and that it's going to ripple beyond the immediate. And so why did I give my children music lessons growing up? Because it would change how they did life for the rest of their lives. And so finding a way to show how the numbers actually tell the story that the funder is looking for, by sharing a story, by bridging to their own experience, we have found particularly effective to help them think beyond the quantitative and into the qualitative.
Thanks, Shelley. There's one question that I'm seeing on the Q&A that's talking about when stories aren't always the most positive. Like mostly what we've been talking about today has been positive success stories, right? And that's one way to do storytelling, is to shed light on what things are positive. But what if things aren't that positive? The Q&A calls that real stories, not necessarily success stories. How do we share those types of stories without having negative impact on that particular community? Any takers on that?
One of the challenges, I think, is, we're afraid of the impact on, public perception if we talk about the not so happy outcomes, right? The challenges as opposed to the celebrations. But again, I think it's how you frame it. And if we're going to expect, celebration every time, then we're going to, in one sense, it actually defeats the purpose of our existence, right? Because we're here to challenge barriers to people's ultimate integration and well-being, and to demonstrate that those barriers still exist, and that things don't always turn out the way they need to. And in particular, in our case, sometimes people do get deported, and we don't always know what happens to some of them, but we actually do know what happens to some of them. Some of them don't survive that deportation. And that becomes a means of communicating the criticalness of the work. And, is that an outcome that you would want, right? Is that what we're trying to do? We don't want those kinds of stories. And sometimes we're not always successful in the work that we do. We pilot projects and we discover that one didn't actually work so well. And that's actually good too, because you refine your strategies by discovering what doesn't work, and you get better at what does work because of that. And I think being really honest about that, but framing it in a way that says it was worth investing in this to help us get to what does work, actually helps funders especially, but even the public in general, to see the realism of the work that we do, that it is challenging, there are barriers, it doesn't always work the way that you want it to. Well, that's pretty consistent with life in general, isn't it? So I think when we're honest and transparent like that, and we can demonstrate what we've learned from that, our experience has been funders and the general public really respect that.
I wanted to raise my hands, but I don't know what happened. Sorry for that. Just to mention, we cannot always share only successful stories. People will see and hear different stories. It's very important to remind everyone that refugees are human beings. They've been through lots of, tragic incidents in their lives. It's not easy what they've been through. And to expect them to be perfect, even we are here, we live in privilege, we're imperfect. It's very important to remind everyone around us about the reality, not to, treat them as, okay, superheroes, you are here, okay, everything is gonna be fine. You need to act 100% perfect, otherwise we're gonna judge you. This reminding would be very important, and that's what we should do in a daily basis. I just wanted to add this input regarding the stories. Thank you.
Thank you, Maysoon. I think, Brian, you would like to say something on video. Do you want to add your comment or question?
Sure. Thanks very much, Rich, and thanks everyone for these wonderful presentations and stories. I want to offer one word of caution because of the power of stories, and I'll give that caution by telling a story. My colleague at the Mennonite Central Committee, Washington, D.C. office told me a story about she being at a U.S. Senate committee where a senator brought in a couple whose child had been killed by somebody from Latin America. And my colleague was sitting there hearing this story. It was just powerful, and the pain was very real in that moment, but it wasn't a reflection of what was typical or normal. And the point is that stories can be misused. We have to make sure that we are ethical in terms of the way we use stories, that they are reflecting what is normal and not what we want to project. So I thinking about ethics in terms of the way we do that involves permission, but also making sure that we're honest about the stories we use. Thanks.
Thanks, Brian. I think we could probably talk about stories for quite some time, but the hour is coming to the close. I know there was a couple questions related to technology and stories of use of videos and the assumptions of not everyone having capacity to do storytelling in a digital format. So there's lots more that we could talk about, but I'm wondering if we should just maybe close off, Sherry, with some closing words.
For sure. Well, I would like to thank our wonderful presenters, Shelley, Louisa, Maysoon, Rich, and Joanna, for sharing your stories, and it was very great to have you here. And I would also like to thank everybody else who joined us today. But good news is that this conversation is not going to be over. We have a platform and a group called Equipping for Community-Based Evaluation on settlenet.org that you can join and get this conversation going on. There are many other people who are interested in evaluation, and you can discuss and share your stories and also questions there with them. And do not forget to also check out our website www.evalforrefugee.ca and keep posted for our upcoming live events in New Year. And if you didn't get a chance to attend our previous live events, we also have the recorded version of those in our website and many other great resources that can help your evaluation. And we also offer coaching sessions, and also if you're in need of customized support for your evaluation, you can check out our mentor pool and find the best fit for your evaluation. And also we offer customized support at CCBR, so do not forget to check our website at communitybasedresearch.ca for all these great support and services that we have. And I would also like to ask you to take 2 minutes to take part in our survey after you log out of this session. We really appreciate your feedback in order to provide you relevant and quality support for your evaluation. Again, I would like to thank our wonderful presenters for today's session and all of you for joining us. I would like to wish everyone a happy holiday season and take care and goodbye.